Welcome, builders, to the third course in our series on programming fundamentals. Thus far, we've covered data types, variables, arrays, and lists. And today we're going to talk about conditional logic and loops. So conditional logic, as our program executes, we have to make decisions. And these decisions can be based on user input, it can be based on data that comes from the database or some sort of web service or the cloud, anything like that. So we need a way to say, if this is true, do this, or if this is not true, do this. So we're going to look at if, then, else statements. Then there's also a concept called a switch, where we look at one value, and if it's based on its value, we can make different decisions in the code and kind of send the code down a different path based on some value. And then finally, we're going to take a look at loops. We've done some loops in our applications in other lessons, but we haven't really done a deep dive on them. So today we're going to take a look at while loops, for loops, and for each loops. We'll do a deep dive on those. So let's go ahead and hop over to the board and take a look. Okay, so for conditional logic, let's start with if statements. So if something's true, so we're going to need a variable. Let's say this is, it's a little bit smaller. This is a variable that we're going to call A. And it is true. So if I want to do an if statement, and if I basically want to check the value of A, and if A is true, we're going to make something happen. So let's write our little if statement here, and we literally write if, then we're going to open parentheses, A. Now, if I just write if A, and then I have my curly braces for my block of code, let's say inside of here, I'm just going to put a comment. The 2 slashes is a comment. So do stuff. And really this would be some sort of logic of var ABC equals 1, 2, 3. Something. We would have some sort of logic inside of this if statement. And I'm actually going to change this to be a function call. So we'll make a function called do stuff. And if A is true, we're going to do stuff. Now, like I said, we can just put A, and it's going to assume, the way an if statement works is if what's between the parentheses is true, then it hops into the block of code. So if A, right now, since A is a Boolean, and it can either be true or false, well, we said our value of A over here is true. So this evaluates to true inside of our if parentheses. So since A evaluates the true, we're going to continue. I can also check if it's true and be explicit and say if A equal true. The double equal is the check to see is this true or false. If it's a single equal sign, that's the assignment operator, where it's actually saying set A equal to true. And this wouldn't compile. You can't do this because it's going to say you can't do the assignment inside of the if statement. So we do the double equal. So if A equals true, do stuff. And that's the simplest example of an if statement. You can also, let's say I make another variable, B. And now let's say both of these conditions have to be true in order for us to do stuff. So I'm going to switch this back to just A. So before we had if A, now we're introducing B. And the way we do that is to do a double ampersand. So 2 ampersands is the AND operator. So if A and B, then do stuff. Now, in this case, both A and B are true. So this logic would execute. But let's say B was false. This will no longer evaluate the true. which means it's going to fall through and not execute the code within that block. Okay? Now, the other option we can do is an OR. So, an OR is 2 lines. So, that's the OR operator. So, if A is true or B is true, then we're going to execute. And in this case, A is true, so it doesn't even have to evaluate B because it already knows it's an OR statement and it's already found a true case. So it will short circuit and go ahead and execute this code. And then also what we can do is I'm going to introduce a third variable here, C. One thing we can also do is, and let's say it's true, we can use parentheses to group our variables. So let's say I want to check if A or B is true. So let's wrap that in parentheses, and C. So either A or B can be true, and C must be true. We can do that, you see, with parentheses. So if this evaluates to true and this evaluates to true, then we're going to do stuff. Now, to continue with this, let's say if A or B is true and C is true, we're going to do this. But what if only C is true? Then maybe we have to do something else. So that is called an else if. So now I can say else if C, and then execute code here. So let's say this is do other stuff, and we'll have a method do other stuff. So if in the first case, if A or B is true and C is true, we're going to do this code. Now, otherwise, if C is true, then do this. And then finally, I can say, if none of that's true, execute the following. So, let me edit my text here. And that's done with an else. And then, let's say this is do other neat stuff. Do other neat stuff. Okay, so we've covered a lot with if then else statements. And you can see they can get pretty complicated where you can group, have ands and ors, else if. All of this can be pretty convoluted, which is powerful because you can do a lot of complex logic. But ideally you want to keep things simple. So whenever possible, I try to not have too many if then else's because it can make sense in your head when you're building it, but when you need to go maintain that code or go back and modify that code, if you're having to sift through all kinds of ands and ors, it can get pretty hairy. So my suggestion is always the KISS principle. KISS, keep it simple, stupid. While we're on the board, the other thing we're going to take a look at is another conditional logic control called a switch. So let's clear the board here. Okay, so let's get a variable here, and we're going to call it permission level. So in our application, imagine if there's different levels of permissions. You could be like an administrator user, you could be a power user, or you could just be a normal user in the application. And then based on this permission level, we have to do different types of logic in the application, such as showing a screen. So let's say when they log into the application, if you're a normal user, you might get the normal welcome screen. If you're an admin user, you would want to be presented with like an admin dashboard. And let's say if you're a power user, you maybe you oversee sets of users. So you would see like a user group or something like that. So we can do that with a switch. And a switch, you can think of it as literally kind of like a toggle switch, where it's, imagine almost like an oven switch, where there are different, it's a dial, and there are different values around it. And then you can turn that switch to go to those different values on the oven. So let's take a look at it, and then we can better visualize it. So at this permission level, let's say for now, we're level 3. And now I'm going to get into our switch statement, which is type switch, and our variable name, which in this case is permission level. And then we're going to wrap it in curly braces because it's going to be a block of code. Now, as I said, it's kind of like, you can think of it as a dial. So it's going to have these different values that we can toggle off of. So over here we set our permission level to 3. But we need to know what to do in case of, let's say it could be 0 through 4. Right? So if it's case 0, let's say this is show welcome screen. Break. And we'll get into what that means in just a minute. So break in case 1 might be show user groups. And then we're going to do a break. And then case 2 show admin. So tell you what, let's go change this value real quick, and then we'll explain what all of this means. So, and I'm actually going to switch some things around. Switch, no pun intended. All right, so what this would do is our permission level is 2, which is going to be an admin. So when they log in, like I said, let's show them a different screen based on their permission level. So at permission level 2, I'm an admin. It's going to switch on permission level. Case 0, which it's not. Case 1, which it's not. Case 2, it is, the value here is equal to this variable. So it executes this block of code. The break tells it we're done. Now, I'm going to change things up. The way this is structured currently, so we go through each of these cases, 0, 1, 2, and then also with a switch statement, you always have a default. Because let's say we only support 0 through 2 here, but what if this is 9? For whatever reason, that value gets set to something we're not expecting inside of our switch. We always need a default case so that it knows how to behave. Now, like I said, I want to rearrange things here. And the reason I want to do that is, regardless if, since this is a user permission level in this example, the default behavior is going to be the welcome screen, because that's the simplest and least permissions, right? So if for whatever reason this permission level is not equal to 0, 1, or 2, I don't want to give them more access than they need. I always want to default and assume least permissions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this show welcome screen and I'm going to move it to the default. So let's do this by default. Now I don't need case 0. If it's case 1, well, we can leave this as 9 for now. If it's case 1, I'm going to show them the user groups because they're like a power user. If it's case 2, show them admin. And then by default, they're always going to get the welcome screen if they're anything else. Now the other thing I can do is I can stack cases. Is I can say, like, if it's case 0 or default, then show welcome screen. So this is valid as well. Okay, so we've taken a look at if then else statements and switch statements on the board. So now let's take a look at them in the code. First thing to do though is hop over to GitHub, to github.com/buildsharper, and we want to clone course 103. So clone this repo on your local and open it up in Visual Studio. Now if you don't know how to clone a repo on your local or work with Git, we have a course specifically dedicated to Git, and then also in course 0 we cover the basics of pulling down a project and cloning it on your local. So take a look at that if needed. And we've got our solution open for course 3. Go into App 1 Program CS. So this application, if you're familiar with the video game Legend of Zelda, this'll you'll kind of recognize some things here. So, but basically what we're doing is, imagine you go into a shop and there's a few things, there's items for sale that you can purchase, and you have the concept of a wallet. So you only have so much money that you're allowed to spend, but then you can pick an item from the list, and if you can afford it, you can purchase that item. And to do this, we had to use if statements as well as switch statements. So let's dig in. So the first thing you'll note, there's this collapsible region here. We haven't seen these before. So a region is just a way to visually make the source code more readable. It's for the developer themselves to kind of group their code into something more readable. But we can expand the region and we can go in. So what we're doing is we're creating these items that are going to be for sale. Now, you can see the type. We're having a new variable, item 1, and it's of type item. An item is a custom class that we wrote for this application. So go into the models folder. You'll see this item.cs. This is what they call a class. In this case, it's a simple object just needed to store data. We needed something to house an object or an item that we're selling. And it's going to have two properties. One is the description of the item, and then 2, a price. So I've got a string description, and the price is a double. So, and again, this is code we haven't seen before. We haven't covered classes, but I wanted you guys to see it just to kind of get a little exposure to it so that when we do cover classes, at least you've seen it. So back to our program CS. So we're creating item 1, which is going to be a sword, and it's going to cost $325. Item 2 is a shield at $275. We've got armor, a potion, and a candle. So we have these 5 items that are going to be for sale. So let me collapse this region back, and you can see regions just come in handy so that if you have a block of code that's taking up a lot of real estate on when you're viewing your code file, you can collapse these regions just to make it more readable. So now we have a wallet, and we want to start with $25.75. That's how much money we're walking into the shop with, and we can go use this money to buy items. Now we have a done variable, and again, here's our while loop. We're going to get into loops more in the next segment, but again, so we've seen it, here it is. So while, and again, the exclamation point before the done variable is a not. So while not done, and this has to evaluate true in order to execute this code. So done is false. Well, not false is true. So while not done, which evaluates the true, we're going to perform the following. We're going to clear the screen. We're going to show them your balance is, and then we can see there's a few things going on here. So the balance is wallet Now, while it is a double, up here we declared it as a variable, but based on the type, which was a decimal value, it's going to make this a double. So I'm converting into a string here, this wallet variable, to string it, and then inside the toString method, I can specify the format. And in this case, I want a $sign in front of it because we're working with dollars. And then I want 0.00, which means even if the value is 0, it's still going to print it as currency. So it's got a $sign in front of it, and then the decimal and the 2 zeros after it. So, and this you can customize. If I needed four zeros after the decimal, I could do that. Or if I needed a comma for the thousands, what you can do is pad this with numbers and say, if you get up to 1,000, I want a comma to format it. There's all sorts of options you can do when formatting decimals. For now, we're going to keep it simple. We'll just have the $sign 0.00. And then, like I said, the Legend of Zelda reference, buy something, Milia, which, if you know, you know. So now we're going to display the items that are for sale. So items 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then finally 6 is exit. And with each one, we're doing item 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're going to write the description. Then we can see these /T's. Those are tabs. So we want it to be a nice, pretty format when it's displayed in our application. So to do that, we're using tabs to tab them out. The /T accomplishes that. So we're going 3 tabs out, and then we're going to print the price. And again, we're formatting it with a $sign and zeros. Okay? Now, we display the menu, and we're awaiting the user's input. So we're doing a console.readLine to read the input. And now that we have the input, we're going to make sure that what they typed is a number. Because we're asking them, make a selection, 1 through 6. Well, if I type Fred, it's not going to know what to do, right? So the first thing I have to do is make sure we're working with numbers. I can use that switch and purchase the item that they had selected. So, first things first, I'm doing this int.try_parse. So what that does is it's trying to turn the string that they typed in into an integer. That's why it's called a try. So if it can, then this will evaluate to true. Now, if it does, there's what's known as an out variable. So if it can indeed parse what they typed into an integer, it's going to store that value into this out variable called selection. So if this is true, then what we need will be in the variable selection that I can then switch on to know which item they want to purchase. So this is the happy path. So if they typed in a number and now we can make a selection on the switch statement, we can actually purchase the item. I'm going to hop down here to say, what if this isn't true? So I couldn't convert what they said into a number. Well, then I'm going to display an error message, invalid selection, please try again. Okay? So let's dig back into Happy Path. So the user has typed a number, and now I can move into my switch and say, well, they typed 1. Well, then I'm going to go purchase item. And this is something we haven't seen before either. This is known as a function. So there's a concept in programming called DRY. It's the DRY principle, D-R-Y. Don't repeat yourself. What that means is whenever there's a block of code that it's going to be repeated multiple times, I can consolidate that into a function, and then I can call that function over and over and over. So you can see, based on if I selected 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I'm basically performing the same action. I'm buying an item, but it's a different item that I'm buying. But the code itself, we wouldn't want to repeat that code 5 times here. Instead, we have this one function that we can call, and we're going to pass it in our wallet and the item that we want to purchase. So let's dig in and see what this purchase item looks like. So this is a function. Now, it's static. We don't have to worry about that yet. That gets into more complicated things. But the way a function is structured is, like we said, it takes in variables, and then it's going to return a value. So this purchase item, I'm taking in a double, which is our wallet balance, and then I'm taking in the item, which is the item we want to purchase. And then the return value of this function is going to be the resulting wallet balance. After they make the purchase, we deduct whatever that item costs, and we're going to send it back to whoever called it. So, and here's an if-else check. So, if the wallet balance is greater than or equal to the item price, which means, can they afford it? Do they have enough money in their wallet to purchase this item? If they do, I'm going to deduct the price of the item from their wallet and then do a console.writeLine. Thanks. It'll be item.price. Please enjoy your new item.description. So, for example, that'll be $1. Enjoy your new sword, right? And then if the wallet balance is not greater than the item price, so let's say the item is $10 and I only have $5, well, I can't afford it. So we present the user with, I'm sorry, you don't have enough money for item.description. Okay? And then finally, as we said, we return the new wallet balance. Now, in the case of if they can't afford it, we haven't affected the wallet balance. But in this case, if they did purchase it, we're making this deduction in the wallet balance, so we'll need that new balance returned here. And then if I scroll back up, you can see I'm saying that wallet is equal to purchase item, because this is now going to give me my new wallet balance. And then finally, if they type in 6, we said that 6 is exit, so we set done to true so that we can break out of our while loop here. Now, if not true, which is false, this will fall out of the while loop and we'll be done executing our application. So let's run it and take a look. Okay, so your balance is $25.75. Buy something, will ya? I can buy a sword, shield, armor, potion, or candle, or hit 6 to exit. So let's say we want a sword. So I'm going to do 1, enter. Thanks, that'll be $3.25. Enjoy your new sword. And now I can see, now if I press enter, it'll refresh the screen. Now my balance is $22.50. And we can continue, and I can buy a shield and armor and a potion and a candle. So I've purchased everything. Now I've only got $2.50 left. But what if I want another sword? So let's say I want a sword. Well, I'm sorry, you don't have enough money for the sword, because our if-then check is making sure we have enough money before it completes the purchase. Okay? And then also, what if I mistype and I accidentally hit Q instead of 1? Well, now it's going to say that's an invalid selection, because when we did that int.try parse, it couldn't turn Q into an integer. So we present the user with an error message and let them try again. Okay, and now let's say I'm ready to exit, and instead of 6, I type 7. Now I get the same error message, but it's a different portion of our code because that int.tryParse succeeded, and we go into our switch, but there isn't a case 7 in our switch. It goes to the default, which was the error message to say invalid selection, right? So finally, we'll do a 6 to exit, bye-bye, and we're out. So that's conditional logic. We've got if, then, else, and then we have switch statements so that we can make decisions in our code based on different variables, whether or not something evaluates to true. And we can make that as simple or as complicated as we need with our ands and our ors and the ability to group our logic with parentheses. So now we're going to move on to loops. So we saw in that last example, we had a while loop, and we said while not done, perform this, right? Well, there's other loops as well. We've got for each loops, we've got for loops. So let's go back to the board and take a look. Let's start with a while loop. So we said we have some value, and for while loops, I like to use the variable name done, just because it makes the most sense in my mind. So let's have a done, and we're going to set that to false by default. Now in our code, as we saw, we'll have while and then whatever we're checking for, and we'll do stuff. We're going to do stuff inside of our while loop. Now, I made a mistake here. So we said while done. Now, in this case, we wanted to continue until it's done. So again, we have to add that exclamation point before our variable, and that is the not. And now it's while not done. So I'm going to continue to do stuff until I finish. And when I finish, I'm going to set this done variable to true. So now, as we said, with each iteration, it's going to perform whatever's in this block of code and go back up to this while, and it's going to evaluate this each time. And then if that's ever false, it falls out of this loop. Now, here's a pitfall in programming. You can get what's called an infinite loop. If I never set, let's set this back to false. If in my code I never set done to true, my application will run forever because it's never going to be done. So, and in some cases you want that to be the case. You want your application to continue to loop until it's either closed out or restarted or anything like that. But in most cases, we want some sort of way to break out of this while loop. So just something to be cautious of I have this while loop with this variable. I need to make sure I change this variable as needed. All right, so the while loop is the first loop that we're going to cover. Perhaps the more common loops that we're going to have are for loops or for each loops. And that basically is used to iterate through some sort of a collection. So as we covered in the array course, we could have a single variable that has a collection of items inside of it. So let's say we have some test scores that we want to iterate through. So I'm going to have an array here of test scores, and let's say I got a 79, 93, and an 87, and those are in a variable called test scores. Okay? And this is, oops. Let's say it's an integer array with 3 elements. Okay? Now, if I needed to display each of these test scores one by one, I have to use a loop. And the for loop is the easiest way to do that. So let's take a look at the syntax of a for loop. So for, I'm going to type this out and then we'll get into the details of what each piece means. So for int I equals, or int I equals 0, I is less than 3, I plus plus. And then we're going to have our block of code where, let's say, we would do a console.writeLine, and I'm going to write test scores sub I. Okay, and then I need to toString it, so we'll do a toString. Okay? So, what this is doing with a for loop, the first thing you need to do is initialize your iterator. So our iterator you can think of as a cursor. So let's get an arrow here. And rotate it. And we're going to label this I. So I is going to allow us to traverse the array and look at each individual element. So by default, to start our for loop, we're saying I equals 0. So I is pointed to 0. And I just realized I need to label my elements here. So as we covered in the array course, everything is 0 based. So the first element is 0. We then have 1 and 2. Okay? So I is now looking at element 0. Now, the next part of this is if this evaluates to true, I execute the code in the block. Okay? So, right now, our first pass into the for loop, I is 0. Now, is 0 less than 3? That's true. So, execute this line of code, which is going to write test scores sub I, which test scores, in this case, I is 0, right? So, test scores of 0 would be 79. So it's going to print out 79. Now, once it's completed this block, it's going to go back up to the for loop and it's going to execute this piece of code where I++. That's going to increment the I variable. And in this case, it's an integer, so it's basically adding 1 to it. So it starts at 0, so I++ would be 1. And now we evaluate this again. So 1 is 1 less than 3. Yes. So now run this line of code. And since I is now 1, we can think of it as moving our iterator here. So I is 1. We're going to do a console.writeLine test scores sub I. So it's going to write 93. Complete this block, and we go back up to I++. Now, it's 2. So we can move our cursor to 2. Is 2 less than 3? That's true. So we're going to execute this final line of code, say test scores sub 2, which would be 87, and that gets displayed. Now, finally, we're going back up here, I++. Now, I is 3, so that would put us out here. So we've now gone outside the bounds of our array. So we can't execute this line of code, but that's good because we're safeguarded by this. If I is less than 3, well, now it's equal to 3. So this no longer evaluates the true. It's false, so we're going to fall out of our loop. And that just ensures that we stay within the bounds of our array. So for loops are good when we know the bounds that we're working with. As you can see up here, we started with 0 and we knew we didn't want to go past 3 and that we could iterate through each element of that array. Okay? So what if we're working with a list? So let me clear the board here. And before, when we covered arrays and lists, we did a grocery list. So let's say we have a grocery list variable, and in it is our groceries. So we've got bread, milk, eggs, cookies, bacon. Sounds good. Okay? So this is our grocery list, is our list of string variable, and then we have 5 elements within it with each of the groceries that we want to get. Now, I can iterate through this using for loops, or I can use a for each loop. So to start, I'll show you how we'll do it with a for loop. So again, for int I equals 0, while I is less than grocery list dot count, which is going to give me the number of groceries that are inside of that list, which in this case it was 5. I++. And then here we can do the console.writeLine grocery list. Now in this case it's a list, so I need to turn it into an array. So to do that, we'll do a .toArray, and that converts our linked list into an array. And then I can reference it by indexing. So I can say to array, and then I want item I that I'm going to print out. Okay? So that's how I would iterate through this list using a for loop. But there's another way to do it in C#, and that's using the for each. And this is a little bit more human readable, as we'll see. So we're going to do a for each, and now we're going to have a variable. Let's call this grocery item in the grocery list. And then we have our curly braces for our block. And here we would do a console.writeLine, and all I have to do here is grocery item. So you can see this, using the traditional for loop, this can get a little hairy with having to convert our list to an array, access it via index, and then actually we don't need the toString here because this is already a list of strings. If this was a list of integers or doubles, we would have to toString it. So that makes this a little bit easier to read. But we're still having to iterate through our grocery list, turn it to an array, and then reference it by the index. Or with a for each, I can say for each grocery item in the list, console.writeLine that item. Right? Pretty simple. So let's go take a look at the code. Okay, so now we're in App 2 of our Course 103 solution. And in Program CS, we can see up top here, let's sing the 12 Days of Christmas. So I think we're all familiar with this song, Two Turtle Doves, Partridge in the Pear Tree. So the way the song works is it repeats the same line on the nth day of Christmas, my true love gave to me, and then it adds the number of whatever's going on for that day. So, for example, we can say, like, on the third day of Christmas, my true love gave to me 3 French hens, 2 turtle doves, and a partridge in a pear tree. So our application is going to sing that song, and it's using for loops to make that happen. So we have each of the lines stored in a string array. So the first one, a partridge in a pear tree, 2 turtle doves, 3 French hens, and so on. Okay? So the way we're going to do this, we have an outer loop and then an inner loop, because with each verse, we're going to say, on the nth day of Christmas, my true love gave to me. And then we're going to list the items that they got that day. Our outer loop is going to be 12 because of the 12 days of Christmas. So we're going to loop. We're going to start at 0, again, because everything in programming is 0 based. And we're going to go up to less than 12, which would be 11. But again, because it's 0 based, that's the 12th item. And then we're going to do an I++. So, and on this, we write on the get day, which is a function. And again, we haven't covered functions yet, but I wanted you guys to see it to get to get more familiar with it. So, get day, and I'm going to pass it in I+1. Well, again, that's because this is 0 based. Get day, let's go take a look at what this is. This uses a switch, as we covered earlier. So I'm going to do a switch on the day. So if the day is equal to 1, say first, 2, second, 3, third, and so on. I have all the way up to the 12th day of Christmas. And our default value is going to just return an empty string, because we shouldn't have that case anyway. We're only going to have 1 through 12. But you can see this here is not 0 based. I built this function so that it makes more sense. It would be weird to say case 0 is first, case 1 is second. That throws everything off. When writing our code, we have to think about maintainability. And if someone else were to come in and look at this method of get day, and they saw, well, case 1 is equal to second and case 2 is equal to third, that's really awkward to maintain. So I made everything 1-to-1 as far as case 1 is first, case 2 is second, and so on. Now, given that, up here where this is actually used, so I'm going to go back in our code, we're adding 1 to I because this method is expecting it non-0 based. Does that make sense? So get day, 0 plus 1 is 1. On the first day of Christmas, my true love gave to me. Now, here's our inner loop. It's another for loop, and we're going to start at I. So for this first one, I is 0. And I'm going to continue while j is greater than or equal to 0. And then we're going to do a j minus minus. This loop is going to go in reverse. So thus far, we've only done loops that have gone forward. We've done an I++, where we move from like element 0 to element 1, 2, 3, and so on. In this case, we're going to be going backwards. So if I look back at our list here, imagine we start on the third day. I want to traverse this array backwards because it sings the song that way. So 3 French hens, 2 turtle doves, and a partridge in a pear tree, right? So we're traversing this backwards, which is why we're doing j minus minus. And we're going to start at I, right? So j is the iterator for our second loop. and we're going to start at I. So the first case, I is 0. So we start here. So on the first day of Christmas, my true love gave to me a partridge in a pear tree. And we do I minus minus, so I is now -1. So is -1 greater than or equal to 0? No. So it falls out. And we do a read line, which is going to wait for the user to press the enter key. Now we're back up here and we do I++. So we do a console.writeLine on the I, which is now equal to 1. So 1 + 1 goes into get day, and that's going to return second. So on the second day of Christmas, my true love gave to me. Now J is equal to I, and we said I was 1. So now if we go back into our loop, again it's 0 based, so 1 is this element, 2 turtle doves. So it's going to write 2 turtle doves. Now I go back into J minus minus, so now J goes from 1 to 0. Well, in our array of lines, 0 is a partridge in a pear tree. So it's going to write a partridge in a pear tree. Back up, J minus minus, well J is 0. J minus minus is going to -1. So it's going to fall out. And again, we wait for the user input. And you can see it goes through each day up to day 12. So let's run it and take a look. Okay, so let's sing the 12 days of Christmas. On the first day of Christmas, my true love gave to me a partridge in a pear tree. And I can press enter. And on the second day of Christmas, my true love gave to me 2 turtle doves and a partridge in a pear tree. And you can see with each time I press enter, we're iterating through our outer loop to go to the next day, and then our inner loop is iterating through each of the lines. So we can see we'll go all the way to the 12th day of Christmas. So pretty cool. We wrote an application that can sing a song, and we did it using for loops with a bonus that we were able to incorporate switches as well. So that's going to do it for today. We covered conditional logic with if statements and switches, and then we also took a look at loops with while loops, for loops, and for each loops. And we took a look at applications that illustrated the use of those. So, one last thing before we go. Homework. First off, I encourage you guys to go download the example applications. Go on to GitHub, clone the Course 103 repo, run these applications, run them locally, and then just kind of tinker with them. You can actually tweak the code, make it do something different, and really understand how things work. It's one thing to show you on screen here and step through the code with you, but once you really dig into the code and make some changes to it, break it, make it do something wacky, then you can really understand what's going on. So that's the first part of the homework, is just to download the repo and run the code locally yourself. Then the second part of the homework assignment is to take that app 1, that shop where we were selling items like the sword, the shield, armor. Take that, and instead of those separate variables for like item 1, item 2, item 3, turn that into an array. Create a list of items, and then have that be how you store those values. Instead of using independent variables, have it all into one list, right? Once you complete the assignment, upload it to Git, create a new Git repository, make a commit, and push the code. Send us a link, tag us on Twitter. We'll give you a retweet, we'll give you props. Or if you're stuck and you have questions and aren't sure how to do things, you can tag us and ask questions on there as well. So that's going to do it. We'll see you next time.